I've always felt that the power of pictures is astonishing. I've always felt that when you look at a truly powerful photograph, that you are changed emotionally forever. Because they stop the world and make you look, make you think, make you feel. I was in journalism school. I was 22 years old, and I had the opportunity to study in London. I bought a train ticket to the eastmost tip of the United Kingdom, and I started wandering the docks, and talking to people. And they said, "Going out for 14 days. You want to come?" It was a storm at night. We were pitching through 50-foot waves, and I was just like, yeah, I was going to be a photographer. So I'd take my lunch hours, I'd take my evenings, I just shot relentlessly on my days off, hoping to get something in the newspaper. You bang your head against the wall long enough, you'll start to crack the wall. In my case, I have a very hard head.
Hey guys, welcome to Nikon TV. I'm your host Mark Cruz of Nikon Canada, and we're here this time in a different set. This is Studio 31 in British Columbia, Vancouver, British Columbia, and it's my honor actually to be here with the world-renowned photographer Joe McNally, joining us for the first time on Nikon TV. Welcome, Joe. It's a pleasure to have you here, my friend.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you. It's my honor to be here. Thank you.
Well, you've been working with us so graciously for the past 2 days with Nikon Canada. We actually had 2 projects out here in Vancouver. You spoke last night in Langara College to a crowd of over 100 people, talking about your work for over an hour. And I wish we had more time on Nikon TV to go over all of that. Well, we're going to have a lot of time to do that today. And we just had a great session in this very studio here at Studio 31. Where again you did one of your intimate workshops, and it's part of what you do, these workshops and just sharing your knowledge. So we thank you for that. We were able to help out and actually take in a lot of what you had to do. We learn a lot of things from Joe every time we see him work. And as a matter of fact, I think it was in this very city. I mean, we're from out east in Ontario, and we worked with you a few times in the past, and I had the pleasure of seeing you out in the planetarium here in Vancouver. I actually want to show this for the Nikon TV audience because I've had a chance to work with you and help you out in the past, but in this situation you actually got me up on stage in front of all these people, a packed auditorium, and I think this is the last documented time here that I performed the splits in the air, and you got me to do that. Anything for Joe McNally to get up on stage and help him out. So that's some good memories back then. We always have a good time here in Vancouver.
You got some good air on that, You were up there.
Not bad for wearing hiking shoes that night. They were pretty heavy. So, Joe, for me anyways, knowing your work for years and years and years, it's been great for me to learn from you and see your breadth of work, especially in the last 2 days. It's impressed upon me how much you're continuing to press the envelope of creative lighting. We call it in Nikon advanced wireless lighting now. And what you're able to do time and time again, and give us an honest view of your workflow. But for those of the Nikon TV viewers out there that may not have heard of Joe McNally, and it's hard to believe there are people out there that didn't, considering our friend from Nikon Canada, Jay, today, he actually got out of a speeding ticket just by name-dropping Joe McNally. I couldn't believe it.
Yes, I don't advise that as a general rule.
I don't either.
Most of the time, it's not going to work.
I just wanted to mention that because here we are in Vancouver, and it seems like everyone knows Joe. But for those people that may not, can you just give us a little background on your experience and how you became a photographer and where you are today?
Sure, and I'll keep it short because it's been a long and interesting road, to be sure. I came out of school. The Syracuse University program I was in was designing us to become newspaper photographers, which was a very viable option at that point in time. And I left school wanting to be a newspaper photographer, and I sort of quasi-accomplished that goal. I started in New York City at a couple of lowly positions, copy boy, studio apprentice at the New York Daily News, which was a mega newspaper back in the day, and then kind of moved out of that into wire service work, basic black and white street photography in New York City. And I was happy doing that. I thought that was, my direction, my path at that point. But I got this oddball job offer, and I took it. It was my first staff position. I became the network still photographer for ABC television in New York City. And my boss just looked at me and said, well, we light things and we shoot Kodachrome. So, have a nice day. And I had never done either of those things, shoot Kodachrome or light anything, so I had to learn really quick. As I always say, thankfully it was a job that expected failure, and I routinely delivered on that expectation. Because as a photographer for a television network, you're always the last consideration on the set. Oh yeah, we got to get stills. You get the still guy in here, and you'd have like 30 seconds to work. So I didn't stay with that job very long. I quit after about 18 months, and I became a freelance photographer. Started working for magazines, and that was really the start of kind of the world of color opened up to me. I found myself being not so adept at kind of the news of the day. I was more comfortable in the realm of my imagination, involving myself with people for the long term to do a story that really showed a bit about their life, not just a quick hit, from a red carpet or a news event where you're witnessing things, but you're not so much involved with the personalities. So I found myself doing a lot of portraiture, working for magazines like Life, doing portraiture for Sports Illustrated, got a contract with Sports Illustrated, started working for National Geographic in the late 80s, worked pretty consistently for the Geographic for about 25 years, and took a break from that in the mid-90s and became the last staff photographer in the history of Life magazine. There was 90 of us over the course of the life of that magazine, and I am the last one. And that didn't last all that long either, and jobs being what they are in the world of journalism. And after a few years, I went back to being a freelancer, and that's where I remain today. The interesting or mildly convoluted thing that has occurred to all of us in the world of photography is that it's changed dramatically. So that path of editorial journalistic work that I was on for many, many years has changed. I do more commercial work now. I seek different kinds of clients because magazines have receded in their power and their economic ability to sustain a photographic career. So you have to adapt. Social media has come into play. The world of digital, the speed of delivery, the excellence of the technology of the cameras that we're using has expanded what's possible for a single lone photographer to achieve really fascinating, complex, fully developed results. So all of that has played into a sea change in our industry, and I've tried my best to kind of hang in there with it as things have changed.
And that you have. I mean, taking in your presentation last night at Langara College, I mean, I've seen it before, but I just realized how much you've evolved with the industry as well, and how much you continue to do so, and how necessary that is for photographers today to continue to do that. And you're kind of unique in your position is that you were able to have the exposure of photography at the time that you got in there. I mean, you just talk about the transition from black and white to color and what that meant to your career, just that one technological change, and now how that's kind of ramped up exponentially. And it's remarkable that, we're talking today in 2018 and you're continuing to press the envelope. And that's something that you mentioned about photojournalism, and I wanted to ask you that question is, you're used to, we know you for being kind of the grandfather of CLS. I think that's what we know you as, or the Grand Master rather. You had, actually, I'll tell you a little story. Me and my colleague Chris, we went to your Flash Bus tour. You actually had, yes. I think it was a several stop tour all across the United States. We tried to get you up into Canada, but we couldn't, so we actually took a road trip down to Buffalo.
Oh my gosh.
It was amazing because it was like a rock concert to see all these people lining up in front of this auditorium on a Sunday morning, and to learn about you and your outlook towards Flash and see live demo on stage. And you packed this auditorium, And that was a few years ago now, before all these changes in radio and whatnot. And you were really pushing the limits back then. But we know you for your flash work, and I just wanted to ask, given your background in photojournalism, and my exposure to photojournalists today, is that I don't really see that used a lot in the PJ realm. What can you tell us or our viewers about, when it's kind of necessary to use flash, or maybe just your outlook towards that? What when you try to implement that in there? Because I know a lot of photojournalists out there don't necessarily do that. How did things change for you? Is it your commercial work where things started to change, where you implemented that?
Not really. I think I've always been involved or interested in applying light photographically, even from early days when I was shooting black and white. I was experimenting with, I used flashes back there that were the equivalent of blacksmith tools, and they just would be this explosion of light, that you try to modify or somehow control. So I've always been intrigued by it, and as you indicate, we have evolved in the technical aspects, or the technology. Photography has gotten us to the point now where we're basically holding computers in our hands that have lenses on them, and the cameras are talking to the flashes are talking back. This to me seems to be technology that should be used, should be deployed in the life of a photographer, because it can enlarge it. It can enlarge the possibilities. That's not to say that available light photography or reportage has is less than meritorious or on any level. It is the defining work of our times. It is the record of our history, and a lot of times photojournalists are confronted with a situation where it'd be absolutely inappropriate to use a flash, to be sure. So the phenomena of light is always with us, and actually too, the cameras themselves, are enabling photojournalists everywhere to work in more and more extreme conditions, dim, dark lighting, tough, kinds of atmospheric conditions. The cameras are weatherproofed now. The ISO ranges are phenomenal. I shot the Rio Olympics for Sports Illustrated. I was routinely working at ISO 5,000, 6,000, 8,000. This is unheard of, for if you flip back to when I started, where the upper ceiling of Tri-X might have been 1,600 or something like that. So yes, we have headlong rushed into this new digital and technologically evolved era, and I think now what's in front of photographers is like a menu. It's almost like ordering a la carte. You have all of these possibilities. You can work in a light and fast way, run and gun. You can create a portrait with a couple of simple speedlights in your bag. You can be mobile and still do lighting. You don't have to bring the flashes out at all, because now you have this ability to shoot at ISO 5000 and turn in stellar results. So now I think it leaves it largely up to the imagination, abilities, and the interest of the photographer in question. Which way do I want to go? And what do I want to do? What's the appropriate response? The very famous photographer, who's a friend of mine, Gregory Heisler, conducted workshops years ago, and I believe the name of the workshops was The Appropriate Response. And in a lot of ways, as photographers, that's what we're always looking for. When you confront an individual, a situation, what is the appropriate response? How is the best way to tell this story? Where is that path for me to tell the story effectively and render it in an emotional way, in an informational way, and in a pictorially successful way?
And I think that's a perfect segue, actually, because when I hear you say those words about when is it appropriate to apply these techniques, the lighting, the way to depict your subjects, I mean, this is, I think, a perfect segue in what we're going to talk about next, is the way you visualize things. And what's taken me personally aback by your photography is the way you've been able to pre-visualize the subject before you even get there. I mean, we're showing a behind-the-scenes shot right now, I think, of a pre-planning for one of your shoots. And, whereas when I observe some photographers at work, I see a lot of them just kind of stumble onto certain lighting, kind of trial and error. But you take this approach very seriously, where you will pre-plan and pre-draw the way you envision the shoot going, notwithstanding you might have changes within your shoot, but I find it remarkable the way you're able to construct a shoot and find what's appropriate. So here's a couple of examples that I think will illustrate that, and maybe you can just walk our viewers through some of these. Here's the famous barbershop quartet. You want to just talk us through kind of what happened in this shoot here?
Sure. I was really happy with these gentlemen because, Lynn, my studio manager, and I were rummaging around for subjects, and I've photographed lots of ballerinas, musicians, etc. And we were like, let's do something different. And so I hit on the idea. I thought, why don't we do a barbershop quartet? See if we can find one. And Lynn, of course, is a magician at finding, people to fill the roles that we imagine them in this photograph to occupy. So we got this wonderful barbershop quartet in the San Francisco, Oakland area, and invited them to be part of the picture. They couldn't have been nicer gentlemen. They were thrilled to be a part of it. And we worked in Oakland's Paramount Theater, which is a classic old Art Deco, beautiful, beautiful theater, but a little on the dark side, as theaters tend to be. And so the challenge there was to bring lighting from the back to the front and really light the entire theater. So this was kind of, certainly one of the more enlarged, I guess you would say, instances of using the full CLS system.
And I think that's what we're looking at right now, the diagram of pushing it to the limits.
Because we mix the systems. The beauty of the SB5000s and the radio-controlled systems that we have now is that you can mix them with the older line-of-sight flashes, which is very important because, let's face it, as photographers, we've got a gear that we want to keep using. You don't want to just throw away your gear just because there's a new flash in town.
So in that shot right there, you actually had line-of-sight as well as radio in that array? Okay,
absolutely.
wow.
Absolutely. So don't hold me to this. I think we used somewhere around 18 or 19 flashes. And the rear of the house, if you will, was governed with radio-controlled flashes.
Okay, great.
Because they would have been the most difficult line-of-sight targets, if you will. But then up on stage, via a hot shoot flash, I was able to actually take that hot shoe flash, the trigger flash, the commander flash that we refer to, off the hot shoe, link it with SC29 cords and put it up high.
Right.
So that governed the near-term flashes. The flashes that were on stage with me lighting the gentleman, and then also the flashes that were in the front row seats, if you will, right behind them. So they all reacted to the line of sight. Then inside the camera, I still have the radio transmission capability through the WRR10, and I've got 3 groups on stage, line of sight, A, B, and C, and then I have D, E, and F that are still radio controlled in the back of the house. So everything fired. What can I say? It was one of those wonderful jobs where you just, it's like a jigsaw puzzle, and as it gets more and more complete, you almost chuckle to yourself like, oh, all right, yeah, that does work, and that works, and that works. And so all these bits and pieces came together to fulfill, kind of a vision of what this should look like.
Well, so that's shot with a D850 then, or is that a D?
This was prior to D850. I believe we shot on a D810.
Okay. Or if it's radio, it's probably D5. I bet you that's a D5.
Oh, it might be D5.
D5, right?
D5.
Because that has the radio capability.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, things are moving fast. It's hard to keep that timeline.
And I think that's a really reassuring shot right there, and it shows the maximum capability. Like, you've really pressed the envelope. You've mixed and matched optical and radio in the Nikon system, brought them together, and actually not only lit the subjects, but the entire auditorium using the range of the radio system, and then utilizing what would be practical to many people out there who still have their optical flashes, SB910s, SB900s, SB800s if they have it, and utilizing it in that array so that you're maximizing on the assets that you have in your bag already. Right?
Sure.
So now I think the next example that we had, and again, the way you're able to push the envelope is this one here. And this one, and again, because you are so adept at the CLS system, the creative lighting system, we want to show this example because this example here was entirely with CLS. And I think with this diagram, you can walk us through it here. Everything is essentially line of sight, but you're pushing the envelopes with cables and things like that. And maybe you can just talk us through your handwritten diagram here.
Well, you know, I don't
really
know what
good
kind
handwriting, by the way. I mean, your diagrams are great.
Oh, well, I don't know. The nuns in grammar school would look at my writing nowadays and spin in their graves, I'm sure. But yeah, I draw these up. It's an interesting way to kind of keep a record of what you've done, because honestly, you know, you shoot on a regular basis. You know, you think, oh my, what did I do with this? You know, so I do these sketches. You know, sometimes before, sometimes after, and they're not great artwork. You know, obviously, but it does indicate, you know, the strategy, the path. I knew I wanted to use Preservation Hall because they have these incredibly filthy windows. They probably haven't been washed in, you know, 100 years or whatever. And that the very essence of those windows, having light come through it, it gives it a patina, a certain character. And so I covered the windows with the equivalent of bed sheets, basically silks. And my lights are out on the street, out on the sidewalk. And so what I needed to do, very crucially, was take my Commander pulse from my Commander flash and translate it through those windows, through the silks, to the lights on the street. So I had to get my Commander flash off the camera, bring it around. If we could see the sketch, you might get a sense there's a little kind of squiggly line that you see going from the camera to the right.
Yes, so that's SC29?
Those are SC29 cords, 3 of them linked together.
Okay.
And then that Commander flash from that angle is firing towards the windows. At the same time, it's also picking up the sensors on 2 flashes that were interior that are warm gelled and are just putting a little bit of a grace note of detail on the old paintings that are in the background there at Preservation Hall.
Okay, so that main commander actually is triggering both the internal and the lights on the outside. So you just needed to get it a little bit outside of the window so it could trigger the flashes on the outside of the window, right?
Exactly. It is actually, the pulse is translating through the bed sheets, and the optical sensors, thankfully, you know, on the SB910s, very sensitive. They picked it up because, as you know, the TTL sensors are looking for that particular frequency of light.
Right.
Is bundled with information, directs them, directs the pre-flash, etc. So that was, to me, the key to the job. I knew I had a great environment, I had a great subject, and so then it becomes up to the photographer at that point to light it appropriately.
That's right, and that's precisely what we witnessed right here. This is the final product. And the name of this gentleman again, I forgot.
Little Joe Lassiter. Okay. It's really one of my favorite portraits because he's such, first of all, a talented man, but also just engaging and gregarious. And that drum set, you know, at Preservation Hall, you know, he's been working that drum set forever, you know, and those musicians down there, you know, you just are in awe of their talent, their longevity, their ability to craft music, understand music, to feel the emotion of music. It's really wonderful.
Right on. We have another. Now, Annie was nice enough to give us this behind the scenes, and it's really crucial. I mean, I'm glad she does this because it gives, you know, our audience a way to, you know, essentially deconstruct some of your scenes. And it's really gracious of you to share this with the world in your workshops and online. And I guess this is a shot of you here shooting across the street. And we're just going to show a couple of behind the scenes images here before we get to the final product. And you can kind of walk us through what we're looking at here. And this is not the final product. This is the scene, just an ambient light.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, a shot like this does take a fair amount of planning. A shot like this is really well and truly an example of teamwork. We have a wonderful studio. Like, these behind the scenes pictures are shot by Annie Cahill, who is my wife, who is also phenomenally talented in all manner of camera work and making pictures. We're really blessed to have her at the studio. She's our director of social media and marketing. So when she's in the background, she is documenting, doing supplying images for, a book perhaps or something like that, or behind the scenes, because behind the scenes to clients has become very, very important in the realm that we live in now. Yeah. So she handles that end of things. We have a wonderful crew chief, Callie, who's been with us for 8 years, so I can really rely on him at camera to get things done, take charge of the crew. And then Lynn is a magnificent producer. This shot actually is in Tarrytown, New York, which has been Lynn's hometown for over 30 years. Now, it seems like, oh, well, yeah, shoot some stores, it's just like, you have no idea, like 200, 250 emails back and forth, permission from the stores, permission from the town, cooperation from the police department, permit from the city council, rerouting of bus routes, okay, because it was starting to get towards the beginning of the school year. We had to shut down Main Street. We had to get releases from everybody's property. The apartments above the main establishments on the sidewalk, there's almost no end to it. Insurance, to shoot a picture like that in this modern day and time that we live in is not a go-click kind of an operation.
Absolutely. You educated me on all the logistics that needs to happen right now. I just wanted to also show people kind of the behind-the-scenes shots of where you actually situated some of your lighting here. It shocked me to know how you actually oriented this. Maybe you can just talk us through a couple of these behind-the-scenes images here. You put one under the awning, one here actually in the rooms of the apartments across the street.
Yep.
And I think what we're going to see here is the final image of how that turned out. And yeah, that's it right there. That's the final product. And you shot that essentially in daytime. It looks like it was at night, but the way you've constructed it, it looks like it's essentially an evening scene.
We're veering towards dusk. I wanted to get the last dregs of sunlight. If you look at the camera left building,
yes,
the gold one there,
yeah, you can see
that's fading daylight.
Right.
Because that building is down the street there is to the west, and we're right on the edge of the Hudson River. So the sunset light is still present, and it's still wrapping around that building, and I wanted to be able to grab the last bit of it because you see the blue sky up there?
Yes.
If that's black, it's less of a photograph.
That's right. You're absolutely right. And I think when Jacob and I were going through these images, my colleague, we noticed that right there, that little strip of blue in the sky, and that essentially dictated and visually what the time of day was. Yeah, that's a dead giveaway. Right?
Yep.
And speaking of that, I mean, the next example we're going to show here is just, something that I wanted to know myself personally is how much you incorporate ambient into your workflow and how much you can construct a scene within an ambient situation. And we just saw you do that, and I think this example here is even much more an illustration of what you're able to do. And if we're going to see the next shot here, we'll see how that translates into the final product. Can you just kind of walk us through what we just saw there in this project that you did?
Well, this is my sort of mildly warped imagination at work. I wanted to come up with some scary scenes for a Halloween theme type of a picture, and so I had this imagination that two trick-or-treaters took the wrong road, ended up in the woods, and encountered an evil tree, and never came home.
Right, and never came.
Which is, a little daunting, but
more warped take on Hansel and Gretel. Yeah, okay, yeah.
Kind of a little bit, So we have worked with periodically a brilliant body painter and artist, Anastasia Durasova. And she was able to construct these two models, or kind of meld them into a tree-like character, and the little boy and the little girl who were our models were real troopers. They were like, I'd be like, okay, you're scared, and the little girl was just awesome. She'd be like, yeah, and it was just so much fun to work with these kids and create this scene. And you're right, it was basically that's my backyard. Those woods are
Oh, is that so?
Yeah,
we
are on the edge of a forest preserve where Annie and I live, and so our backyard ends in these woods. So we just went out into the woods and we grabbed a piece of woods and shot it, and we had to light the woods, and overpowered the daylight. This was shot at like 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We're working with child actors, you know, you can't, you know, you don't want to keep them up late at night and stuff like that. So we worked throughout the day, and then we had a smoke technician on the set with us. There are smoke specialists, believe it or not, that are associated, generally speaking, with TV and movies. And what I needed was not just kind of fog, I needed low-lying like swamp fog. I needed fog that hugged the ground. And so we worked with a special mix, and the fog is very heavy and dense, and it kind of travels. It literally travels almost snake-like across the roots and stuff of the trees. And then of course, you know, that picture is pretty much as it came out of camera. You know, we lit the forest and had great expressions on our kids, and the evil tree was all sorts of, you know, scary, and it was just a very fun day in the field, because at the end of the day I had a picture that was very close to what I imagined the picture needed to be at the beginning of the day. And when I can complete that circle in the field, then I kind of, at the end of the day, I'm like, okay, that was a good effort, we did well.
Well, that's again a great segue into the next question I was going to ask you, is that you talk about kind of getting images right out of camera, and, you know, trying to perfect that workflow that so that you have that sense of fulfillment that you nailed it right in camera. And given the fact that, you know, you have a relationship with Nikon, you are a Nikon USA ambassador, we showed a little featurette before this segment started, and you were among the first ones to shoot with the D850. And I noticed in that video there you commented on some of the new color features of the camera. And I know we talked about, you know, your transition from black and white into color, and now we're dealing with white balance in cameras now. I found it interesting because everybody's talking about the D850's megapixels, 46 megapixels, 9 frames per second, but you were one of the few that talked about the color coming out of the D850. And I found that really interesting because you highlighted some of the white balance options there. Do you want to just talk about how, you know, the Nikon color gamut system works within your overall workflow?
Sure. You know, color is always with us, you know, the way we see it, the way we feel it. Color has an emotional response, you know, it triggers that in your viewer. So you really want to be careful with your color. You know, I've had folks look at me, and I might be teaching or something, and I'm trying to be careful about the color, or mentor them about they should be choosing white balances, etc. And some folks have actually looked at me over time and said, well, what's the big deal with white balance? You're shooting raw, you can just change it later. And I'm like, not really, you know. I mean, you can. I mean, Photoshop is a wonderful thing, and we use it. We retouch, you know, our pictures. You know, there's in this scene that we're about to see, there's retouching, because that toppling statue is not really toppling, you know. So we do retouching, to be sure. But the essence of procuring color on location, I think, is the responsibility of the photographer to nail it as best as they can, as closely as they can, while they're in the field. And that's why, like, the high-res LCD is a very important tool to me, and the ability now, the D850, within the realm of auto white balance, to basically parse it out into 3 separate color spaces, where you're either retaining a neutral white, using a normal auto white balance, or pushing the auto white balance into a realm where it is auto white balancing but retaining warmth, so you're veering it into the warm sector. So I find that to be an advantage, you know, because color, shadings of color are very powerful on location. It's like, it's the wrong word to say a luxury item, you know, but, you know, when you fill a picture with detail, and that's why oftentimes light front to back of a scene, you know, you know, again, some folks will, well, you know, there's nothing going on back there, but I put a little light in the background of a scene because you want the viewer to travel. And lighting a picture is very much like having a conversation with your viewer. What you light and what you don't light becomes crucial to what they look at. So essentially, when you're lighting effectively, you are giving someone a psychological roadmap to the photograph. You're saying to them, look here, maybe not so much here. This back here is sort of interesting, gives you context. It's it's actually a nuanced conversation, a little bit of a dance you're doing with your viewer if you light something appropriately and also with accurate color.
I think that's great insight for our viewers, you know, especially the ones that are learning this craft and knowing that it's not necessarily just about the megapixels, but it is so much more about the language of color that you just explained and how that translates into our motions, the way it guides the viewer, just as you suggested throughout the photo. And you mentioned that actually last night in a couple of your critiques at Langara, and that was insightful for me to take in as well, how you can, you know, translate this language of photography through not only your composition, foreground, background, but also how it translates into color and how that how critical that is. Now, we actually had that behind-the-scenes shot there of you in that museum in Budapest, and we're going to show a little featurette later on about the D850 and how you were actually among a select few that were able to kind of use that in a pre-production fashion to come out with content to advertise the new camera. But one thing that we learned in that featurette is that this scene that we're looking at right now in this humongous museum here is, you know, when you think of shooting something in this scene, you think about, well, I think about anyways, lighting the subject, but what I found out is that not only did you light the subjects, you lit the space, you created the ambient light in this. So do you just want to just kind of walk our viewers through your mindset in a production like this, because it is a massive production. A lot of people just don't know when they look at the end product just how much vision and pre-production go into the final product.
Sure. Well, you know, you walk into a museum like this. This is a beautiful old museum in Budapest called the Museum of Ethnography. And I had created the concept, I had written up the concept and submitted it as a treatment, and they liked it. And so then you're kind of bound by that. It's like, oh my God, they liked it. Now we have to actually go do it.
Right, so one thing that I didn't include here was your proposal. You actually had a proposal. This was your vision. It was straight from your proposal. It was a couple of paragraphs worth that you did to get this job.
Exactly. And they asked for 3 treatments. This was the one that they chose. And so when you walk into a situation like that, your emotions and thinking hover between like, kind of, oh my God, what have I done? To like, do you think they'll notice if I just leave? You know, but you know, because it's like, wow, all right, I said I could do this, so I better well go ahead and do it, you know. So yeah, we had to work overnight in the museum. We couldn't work during the day. So we're working in the dead of night. We would start about maybe, I don't know, 8 o'clock at night, something like that, and work through the next morning until about 6 a.m. And it was a week-long job. We had to move into Budapest literally as a team, and we, you know, did casting and sizing and wardrobe and discussed hair, makeup, then started to discuss strategies for lighting, because we had to light, to create a natural feel in the museum, we had to light the museum from the outside. So I have I think it was like a 75-foot boom crane truck outside. There's a massive set of windows to camera left, and there are, I believe, six or seven 2400 watt-second units up there. A lot of power, and very shiny reflector pans, what we call long beam or narrow beam reflectors, you know, and big scoops around the light, so it really punches it. And we had to blast light through the windows to create a normal effect, because the last thing you want in a photograph like this, or any photograph, is to have a dead black space, especially if that space is a window, because then it's just kind of, it loses, you know, impact and dimensionality which is what you're looking for, you know. So, so I lit the windows, which lit the upper cavernous spaces of the museum. And then from that point on, it was a lot of accent lighting, and using, again, 2400 watt-second units, 1200 watt-second units, right on down to speedlights. Speedlights played a really crucial role in this, because some of the near-term details all lit with speedlights. So no matter how much power we have throughout the museum, down in the neck of the woods where I'm really crucially manipulating the photograph, I'm using speedlights.
And I think this actually shows your complete mastery here of flash, because, I mean, initially we showed you mixing and matching radio and line of sight speedlights. Now you're mixing big flash and small flash in the same scene together. So you're talking a couple of different languages here, a couple of different technological routes that you're kind of aggregating into one scene, all like that. And that we're seeing right here is your hand-drawn pre-planning, and some of the things that I actually asked Jacob to put this in our timeline here is because what we see is you're visualizing where the components are going in the scene before they actually get there. So for example, there's a guard at a desk that you know that you're going to light with a green gel with an SB 5000 in the front there. And eventually we're going to get to, I think, the final product. Did we have any more behind the scenes shots, or are we just going to get to the final shot? I think we want to see how, oh yeah, there's a couple behind the scenes. So again, this is just gives our viewers a glimpse into how much there is going on here. So there's a foreground and a background, and I think we're just going to kind of show the end result, and that's essentially it. And I think you just talked us right through it, right?
Yeah, I think that's close to being the full frame. There's a little bit more up top, you know, than we're seeing.
The viewers at home are seeing the full thing. Yeah.
There we go. Yeah. Okay. All right. Cool. Yeah. It was kind of energizing, really, because from this simple couple of paragraphs I wrote, we ended up with 40 to 50 people on the set, all working feverishly to sort of make this come true. And I'm kind of inwardly chuckling in between moments where I'm inwardly screaming that, you know, I've just watched too many James Bond movies, you know, and that, you know, the cat burglar is leaving with the gems and knocks over the statue and all this sort of, you know, kind of.
I think it was a great concept. It worked fabulously. It took it from concept to final production, and it worked. And like you said, it helped employ 50 people, I think, in that production. Right?
Yep. I don't know if we can get back to that production overhead shot, but you know, you encounter things. You prepare as much as you can. You sketch as much as you can. You plan and say, okay, this and that. But there are things you cannot prepare for, like the weight of the gown. I have big fans, as you can see off to camera, right? The fans were not lifting the gown because it was kind of this gold lame material, and we like the gown, but if you see the two gentlemen on the extreme left, and they have what looks sort of like fishing poles.
Okay, yeah.
They have, at the end of those fishing poles, monofilament line that is then tied to the gown. And when I would call action, they would raise those poles and literally flip the gown in the air. It would get assisted by the fan, but the fan couldn't do the work on its own. So I had to kind of improvise that on the set in the middle of things to get the desired sort of ripple in the fabric that I wanted, that purportedly was then knocking over the statue.
Oh, look at that. Look at the final product.
You know, so, and Nikon was great to work with on this, I have to say. They have afforded me some wonderful opportunities to really exercise my craft and my imagination, so I'm very thankful to have participated in this. And they ended up running the ad, and the tagline they put on it, which I was very comfortable with, they said, "I am taking chances." And I said, that's perfect, because this picture was a very big chance I took. I threw the dice and said, yeah, I can do that. And, you know, it came around.
And I think that's the hallmark of your career. You've been taking chances, and you've been very honest, you know, in all of your talks where you failed at certain times, or where those chances are where you kind of stumble across some happy accidents and things that you learn along the way. And one of the things that I took from one of your previous interviews is that you said, I believe, over the course of a year, you're trying to even, filter out your portfolio, and you've been an instructor, I think, at the Eddie Adams workshop for several years in the past, and one of the tasks of the leaders was to kind of find 5 images that you wanted to show what you've been doing in the past 12 months or something like that. And I think you mentioned how you kind of struggled to come up with 5 images because you're obviously very critical of your work. How do you, Joe McNally, kind of come to your mind that you've nailed a shot, that you're pleased with the way something comes out?
There's several, barometers of that, success and of various types. If you're working commercially or editorially, one of those barometers is the client happy? Happy client is a good client, because then the happy client pays you, and enables you to keep working. So that's a great thing. So I've turned in many pictures over the course of time where the client's very happy and I'm sort of, not going to stick with me. And then there's times where you feel like you're really struggling, and you kind of look back at a stretch of time and say, boy, I seem to have lost confidence. The images I'm getting here or the jobs I'm getting here are not kind of like connecting with my kind of soul or imagination. And those can be tough times. Every photographer experiences them. You go through ups and downs in the course of this field if you are going to establish a certain level of longevity. A friend of mine at the National Geographic, I went to a lecture she gave, and it was very telling. She said, look, at this point in time, anybody can make a good photograph. And that's true. I mean, put a D5 in somebody's hands, autofocuses, auto everything's, and they can make some pretty good pictures. But maintaining a career year after year after year where you turn in editorially, commercially seaworthy work that people want to look at, that's a long, tough slog. That has its moments, to be sure. And I've had many of them. So I look back every year and I try to self-assess. Like, how was that? How did it work out? And the personal barometer I have for success is, I think I kind of mentioned it, if a photograph comes close to what I imagine it could be, then I feel like I've probably had a pretty good day in the field, and I can feel good about that.
That's great. I think that's really important for people to hear, especially those that are, seeing such a large breadth of work, going through maybe your Instagram account and going through your own portfolio and seeing your mindset towards this work, and kind of essentially title of your previous book, The Moment It Clicks. Now, one of the other things that you do with your time, obviously, is the many workshops that you do all around the world, and that's a big part of Joe McNally. I know that you've traveled essentially all 4 corners of the globe and seen many, many people throughout your travels. I mean, you're here in Vancouver. I know you were at Cuba earlier this year. You've been to St. Lucia, the Philippines, etc. You've seen it all. I mean, just in your workshops, and I know that you love interacting with the people. I've seen you last night in an auditorium full of 100 people. You're going around shaking hands individually with those people. Tell us about the personal relationships that you've seen with the people all over the world, and kind of how that's affected you and going to all these different workshops, and maybe some of a couple of memorable moments, with these working with people in these workshops.
Sure. I mean, I had the benefit growing up as a young photographer of being mentored, as I say, sometimes fiercely by editors and older photographers who kind of showed me the ropes, if you will, and editors who counseled me or pushed me to do better. So I value teaching, to be sure. I also enjoy the company of photographers. We share a huge commonality of, passions, grievances, mistakes. We are definitely a mixed bag of anxiety, talent, and all that sort of stuff, which is fun to share with other photographers. So we speak a common language. But also, speaking of language, what has evolved over time that I really relish is how photography has become such an enormously powerful universal language. I mean, I could do a quick picture of you right now, send it off, you know, into my computer or my iPhone, and put it out on Facebook or Instagram or something like that, and someone in Moscow or London or Tokyo is going to see it within minutes, seconds even, you know, boom, and they're going to react to it. That's remarkable. And I remember in the 1984 Olympics, I went up, I was shooting for ABC television, and there was an enormous boom crane over Los Angeles Coliseum. The 84 games were in LA. And the ABC cameraman, he allowed me to come up. He said, you got to be really steady, you know, and I said, don't worry, I won't bother you. And so I did this fisheye view that ABC got tremendous usage out of, because it's the ABC camera overhead of Los Angeles Coliseum with thousands and thousands of people and the games taking place. Well, I remember thinking up there, I'm shooting like crazy, wonderful, you know. I think I was shooting F2s at the time, and shooting Kodachrome 64, and putting those rolls of Kodachrome in my bag. Mm-hmm. Whereas I'm standing next to someone whose picture is instantly being viewed by millions of people all over the world. And I thought to myself, someday this has to change. Someday this will change, you know, for us as still photographers, as visual communicators. And now we have that. At the last Olympics in Rio, you know, I'm tethered to my editor. You know, I go down into the well, I set up my cameras, and I plug an Ethernet into my D5, and as I'm shooting, my editor is seeing it, you know, in an office miles away, and then he or she is culling those pictures, captioning them, putting them out in the wires and all over the place, and you know, within minutes, what I've shot of Usain Bolt is being seen by somebody, someplace, you know. So that instantaneous communication that we can engage in as visual communicators transcends language, I think, because language is still hard, you know. You go, you know, I don't speak,
sure,
you know, every language in the world, to be sure, but photography and the act of picture making is a bond-inducing process. You know, just showing somebody your LCD and getting them to giggle or something like that. Or showing someone, you know, picking someone out of a crowd and making their portrait, and then you make that portrait and you chose them because they're interesting. They don't view themselves as interesting. They're like, oh no, you don't want to take my picture. No, no, I want to take your picture. And then you show them the LCD, and it might be, it just might be, the best photograph that's ever been taken of them. And they look at like, oh wow, yeah, actually that's kind of cool. And that's a tremendous gift you can give someone. You know, the gift of visual recognition, the acknowledgement of their beauty, no matter who it is, you know. And so there's all sorts of emotional impact that photography can have that becomes part of our language, part of our modern culture, part of the instantaneous nature of who we are as people all over the world.
Yeah, and I think you do a really good job of disarming a lot of people's maybe trepidation about having their picture taken. I've seen probably now about 4 or 5 of your workshops, and you know, you'll take people from the audience every now and then and bring them up on stage, and you see their, I guess, their psychology change kind of as they go through the sequence of images you take of them, and that's something that you do really well, and I've been very lucky to see those in your workshop, so thank you for that.
Thanks.
We are going to shift gears here for a second, because you're also not only a Nikon ambassador, but for those people that don't know, you're also a Lastolite designer, I guess you could say. You've been working with their design team and actually have your own line of products and modifiers out there. We have one here if you'd like to show us kind of maybe, because this is an important part actually. I mean, sure. I know it's, you know, you feel, of course you're so humble you don't want to show some of your products here, but we use them at the office as well. I mean, we had the opportunity to, when we were crafting our studio and looking at some of the modifiers that we're going to use for our speedlights, what to get, and we actually ended up getting the Lastolite McNally series, a couple of your diffusers, modifiers, softboxes. What could you show us here about one thing that you might want to
Sure.
advise people about what they want to get?
It's kind of a new-ish addition. First of all, the Lastolite folks are terrific. They actually are a manufacturer that listens to photographers, which is a wonderful thing, you know, as is Nikon, you know, suggestions, news from the field, very important. So I had never been completely happy with the quality of light from the small kind of stuffable soft boxes. Okay, but a little bit rough around the edges. So I worked with Last Light and their designers and tried to craft a small collapsible softbox that can fit in your bag and is inexpensive, that produces a really nice quality of light. And so we came up with this, and all, you know, due diligence and credit to the folks at Last Light. They really crafted it well. And you know, you put a Speedlight into this, it's got an interior baffle, and then the this is the exterior port where the light obviously flows from. But the cool thing is, and I kind of was pretty insistent about this, to control light, I've always wanted to, or striven to control light. And because, you know, anybody can put up an umbrella, light goes everywhere, you know, but if you want to light this, but not that, that speaks to control. So I suggested to them that we make sure this tiny little softbox had kind of the kind of controls and baffles that you would generally associate with much bigger softboxes. So the front diffuser that comes with the unit is, you know, this is standard straight up diffusion material, but the difference here is that it's got a very deep edge baffle.
Right, so it doesn't spill out.
It doesn't go sideways, so it really collects. Further to that, as an accessory, I asked them to create this, which is a diffuser, just normal diffuser, but when you put it on to the unit, it's got what's called an egg crate or a grid, a fabric grid, and that collimates the light. And is, you know, say for instance, if I was doing your portrait right now and I didn't want light spilling all over this white wall set here, I can really locate that light around your head and shoulders by using this and not lose the quality of the light, but just simply kind of dial it in to a certain area. And they felt strongly about it, and they went ahead and put it out, and it's been very, very popular. So I'm really happy with this. I always take at least 2 or 3 of them with me, because I can actually craft a really nice portrait light with something that, you know, when you are done at the end of the day, you know, goes back in your bag.
Very convenient, and there's actually a second layer of diffusion in there that you could remove if you wanted it to be a little bit harder, I suppose, right? So I definitely see the evidence of that in a lot of your work, and just in the workshop that we just did right now, and how you're able to channel that light and corral it essentially so that it doesn't spill on different parts of the person. Very, very cool stuff, Joe. So, you know, we're shift gears here a little bit. We're gonna break for about 60 seconds. And when we come back, the Nikon TV audience is gonna submit us a few Q&As here with Joe McNally. So we'll be back in 60 seconds.
The D850, you know, is the crossroads of a lot of things I've wanted in a camera for a long time. It's got speed coupled with resolution. Also a big feature of the camera is the speed of processing and the size of the buffer. And I have shot this camera really fast. I have yet to buffer it out. I would experiment with the new iteration of auto white balance. You've got auto 0 and auto 1. Depending on which one you choose, it'll take the white balance and make it very neutral relative to the scene, or it will embrace the scene, make it neutral, but also reserve some of the warm qualities to the scenes. If you're involved in speedlights and any sort of portrait type of photography with small flash, this camera is huge. This camera now liaisons fully and completely with the SP5000 radio TTL system. Watch your eyes, testing. So now I can work flashes wirelessly, and I don't have to worry about line of sight. In other words, I can put them across the street and put them in a window of a building, and the camera doesn't see it, but it can still trigger it because it's firing by radio, and I have TTL control. So this is a whole new ballgame as far as I'm concerned. Technology like this allows me to take chances.
Okay, we're back here on Nikon TV with Joe McNally, and we are going to now take this opportunity to get some Q&A from our Facebook audience. And lo and behold, I knew we wouldn't have a problem getting questions from you guys today, so thank you for tuning in on the Saturday afternoon here. Wherever you are in the world. I guess we're in Vancouver, Canada right now, but these questions could be coming from anywhere, Joe. So first one comes from Mark, not me, but another Mark out there, and that is, this is a little bit technical, as they say, what is the camera you find yourself always reaching for? Why is that? So obviously, you have a lot of cameras in your gear bag. It's up to you at this point in time, 2018. What do you reach for when you,
All right, good question. You know, in the days of film, you know, we will progress from F2, F3, F4, F5, etc. And pretty much that camera was the camera that you used. You know, there were certain other subsets, but you know, now I tend to assign, you know, jobs or types of jobs to certain kinds of camera. Like our D5 is our workhorse camera. You know, fast, autofocuses really well. All those attributes that you would associate with a flagship. I use the D500 as you know, wonderful camera. You know, kind of it's a crop sensor camera, but it's super facile. Got the movable LCD, all that sort of stuff. But I would have to say, for the last year or more, however long the D850 has actually been out, the D850 is the camera that goes with us and is my primary camera. I do a lot of portraiture, and I oftentimes am working with my subject under some measure of control. I can kind of direct the action. We just did a job last week for a school in North Carolina where I had to do portraits of this legendary lady who is the namesake of the school, and they're going to make a 60 by 80 print. So that was D850 all the way.
right, with that 46 megapixel, that would be the camera for the job, obviously. Okay, that makes a lot of sense, and I think a lot of people out there are curious, given the fact that you know, there's the flagship, and now we have the D850. There's a lot of crossover, and people are thinking, what do you go for? It's interesting to hear you say the D850, and I think it makes a lot of sense out there. I mean, since it came out a year ago, as you said, it's been kind of the camera that's done everything. It can do your high resolution, can give you the color that you mentioned earlier in the segment with the white balance. It has the speed if you need it, right? I saw your D850 actually kitted with the grip as well, so I'm sure you can utilize your your D5 batteries in there to get the 9 frames per second. So it makes a lot of sense. Next question we're going to get to is from Derek, and his question is a Speedlight question. He says, what's the biggest difference that the SB5000 has made on your location workflow?
Well, if I'm in the realm of shooting a Speedlight job, there's no, almost no telling or describing how much the envelope of possibility has been enlarged via the radio sequencing. I lit up a helicopter cab in the air, and I triggered it from another helicopter, you know.
I saw that shot.
150, 200 feet away in the air over New York City. We had 3 helicopters rotating, you know, because we had a BTS helicopter, and I had my shoot helicopter, and I had my subject helicopter. So we had a television stunt woman out on the skids of the helicopter. Safely, she was tethered, all that sort of stuff was going on. But I'm able to direct the action, control the intensity of the flashes, because I'm shooting at dusk, ever receding available light, and so I'm able to correspondingly adjust the power of my flashes inside the helicopter that's flying out there 150 feet away from my radio. Not possible in days gone by.
Right, absolutely not. I mean, even if you were to utilize, say, third-party radio transmitters and things like that, I would assume that now you have less parts to deal with in your bag. You know, it's all integrated into the flash itself. All you need is that little piece that goes right onto the D850. So,
yep.
It makes a lot of sense that that's impacted your workflow a lot. So, are you exclusively now working with the SB5000 for Speedlights, or do you still integrate some of the 910s in there as well? Or
we have, I would say, for most jobs, you know, I have a bunch of SB5000s,
yeah.
you know, so I don't have to get too deep into my inventory, generally speaking. We have a couple of 910s left over,
right?
You know,
okay.
But generally speaking, if I, you know, why go backwards, you know, if I don't have to,
right?
You know, So.
Okay, cool. Let me just see here. Now we have one from. Okay, this one is from Karen. She says, "Was there ever a photo job that you just couldn't do?" So say something that you passed up on for whatever reason.
Sure.
Yeah.
And there's been some I should have passed up on because I didn't do a very good job. It didn't, you know, there's food for the table and food for the soul, and you have to have a measure of both as a photographer. But you also have to resolutely remain in an area where you are taking jobs that you are vibrantly committed to. You know, so if you're just kind of, you know, hacking away at a job, that's not a good place to be. And I've done that a couple of times, I have to admit, you know, just to keep the studio alive, keep some money coming in the door. So yes, there are jobs I've passed on. There's jobs I didn't connect with, you know, once I took them. All part of, I think, the run of a life of a photographer.
Right. Yeah, and it's I guess it's interesting, you know, making those decisions, and I guess some of them you come with experience to know when to say no to certain gigs, right? Next question comes from James. He says, "You photographed a bunch of celebrities, sports people, and I'm not going to ask you to name your least favorite, but I'd like to know who is the most fun to photograph." I know you've shot a lot of people, but this this question is asking who's the most fun.
Thankfully, I've had, you know, an enjoyable time with lots of different people. I mean, I have a good relationship with somebody like Tony Bennett. You know, I've worked with Tony, classy gentleman, he's a wonderful guy. In terms of just sheer fun, good Lord, you know,
hard one to answer,
yeah.
I would imagine.
It is very, very hard. You know, I've had lots of interesting experiences with wonderful people. Some of them are celebrities, some are not. The beautiful thing about being a photographer is that you are oftentimes assigned to go photograph somebody because they are truly excellent at what they do.
Right.
They're noteworthy, they're significant, they're a wonderful author, or a dancer, or a comedian, or, you know, I photographed Dana Carvey many years ago. I could barely hold the camera, I was laughing so hard. You know, he just was nonstop manic,
right.
You know. There was a legendary ball player whose career was all too short, Mark the Bird Fidrich, pitched for Detroit, and he used to talk to the ball. He was this goofy guy. Sadly, he's passed on, and he died in a tragic accident. But I photographed him a couple of times, and we just had a simpatico, and we were just a pair of goofballs, and the pictures really showed it, you know, really showed it. And the last time I photographed him, because he was Mark the Bird, you know, we got Big Bird from Sesame Street to come up with us. And so we had this enormous yellow bird out on his farm outside of Boston, and it was just nonstop goofball city. And he had a jersey, so he wrote to me this enigmatic thing. He said, "Dear Joe, love this. What it is, the bird." You know, and so you have memories like that. And I just felt, I wrote a blog about him after he passed away because he had a trucking firm, and sadly he had an accident with one of the trucks, and he did not survive. And I just felt awful about it, you know, because you're such a free spirit. You love folks like that, you know, who are open to possibilities. That's the thing, you know. Oftentimes when you get, you know, maybe a corporate environment or whatever, political environment where everybody's conscious of their image, the first answers you get are no, 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 oh no, no, no. I'll just sit here at my desk, you know. Okay, so you love those moments as a photographer where you come at somebody with your imagination and they are open to it. Like, wow, that's awesome.
I can tell that makes your job as a photographer that much more enjoyable, but probably that much more effective as well.
Absolutely.
In the images
you
you
know,
get.
I look at people who try to truncate the possibilities of a job, and I'm like, dude, you know, this is your picture. You know, you're gonna be in print or on the screen or something like that. I'm just trying to make you as interesting as I possibly can.
And I wish a lot of the people that are on the front end of the camera would realize that perspective from the photographer's side. Yep. Next question comes from Alice, and she says, the age-old question: if you could choose one of the editing lenses for all your work, existing. That spell check. Ugh. Thanks, Jay. If you could choose one of the existing lenses of, I guess, your existing lenses for work, which one would it be? And I guess I kind of imagine you're going to say which depends what job, but is there a particular lens you're in love with?
Well, I hate to disappoint, you know, in the sense of like, I'd love to say, oh yeah, I had this, you know, fantastically, you know, exotic lens. So when I say disappoint, I mean like my response is going to be kind of middle of the road here. I mean, it's not an exotic lens. It's just a tremendously useful lens. I have to say that the 24-70 f2.8 goes with us all the time.
Right.
And it's nothing that's wild or out there, or, you know, but I'm not a wildlife photographer. I'm not an architectural photographer. You know, all these specialties and subsets that require certain kinds of lenses, like, you know, the 19mm tilt shift. What a wonderful lens. I mean, and I've been experimenting with it lately for portraiture, and it's really kind of cool. But I don't use it every day. Right. You know, the 24-70 is workhorse, go-to, handy set of millimeters that you can do an environmental portrait and cover a scene, establish an area, get a general view. You go wide, you can go to almost portrait. 70 is almost kind of portraity, you know. So I would say in terms of usefulness, maybe not it might not be a love affair, but it's useful, the 24-70.
And I think I've seen you use probably a lot the 70-200 as well in some of these situations.
70-200 is definitely a favorite lens. If I have a favorite, you know, if I could give, you know, a more, you know, enticing answer to the question, my favorite telephoto is the 200 f2.
Oh, the 200 f2, right? Oh my, we share that in common. Okay,
you know,
it's the 200.
I mean, it may be the sharpest telephoto I've ever used, and that extra f-stop.
That's it.
Man.
For the look,
it's
absolutely.
Killer. It's killer lens. But again, not a lens I use every day.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I think it's important for people to hear that, especially given the fact that you have a breadth of lenses and access to all these different lenses. But your tried and true is, in fact, the 24-70. You using the VR or the non-VR?
The VR, yeah.
Oh, the VR. Okay,
updated
great.
to the VR.
Excellent. Okay, yeah. We got a couple more questions here if we have time. This one comes from Marcel. He says, "You've been all over the world. Is there a place that you could see yourself living besides New York that you photographed before?" So, home for you is New York, and
well, home for me was New York for many years.
Okay.
You know, Annie and I now live in Connecticut,
okay,
and we love it there. We love our kind of, we call it our house out in the woods. We're sort of, you know, apart from things. It's really kind of nice, and it's quiet. You know, but Annie and I, we go to London a great deal. We love London. I think if we ever entertain living someplace else, might be London. We both love Canada, and I'm not saying that just because I'm in Canada. It's just Canadians are wonderful, gracious, friendly folks, and we love in particular coming to Vancouver because I've worked here a lot, and the creative community here, the photographic community, is really vibrant, really energized, and there's a lot of talent here. So it's a really great community to interact with.
Well, I know that every time you come here to Vancouver, especially here to Vancouver, you get such a great response in terms of the attendance to your workshops, to your talks, and especially just the interactions that we see with people. It doesn't take a lot to get people out to your workshops here. So we've definitely felt the energy when you come to this city, and it's a great city. Actually, I'm glad to be here again myself with the Nikon TV crew. So. Thank you for that, Joe. A couple more questions here, and we'll wrap it up and call it a day. This one comes in from Jake, and he asks, okay, this is a cool question here. Creatively, how do you get out of a funk? I guess, you know, we've heard of writer's block and things like that. We might have creative block as a photographer, and he's asking, you know, do you ever get in a funk? I mean, you're Joe McNally.
Yes, and I do get into a funk, and I do, sometimes I'm out there and I just feel like I can't buy a picture, and I feel like I've got feet of stone and eyes that do not see. there are days like that. Look, this is a very human thing to do, right? It turns sometimes on a dime, an interaction. If you have an emotional connection to your subject, do you like the person? Do they have, enough time for you? All that sort of stuff. Jobs can turn any which way on a whim. So, we're dependent on weather, on light, all these things that we cannot control. It can be very anxiety producing, so yeah, you can get yourself into a funk sometimes. You can feel like, wow, that job just didn't work. And it could be for reasons that are entirely apart from you. And you just kind of like, if that person had just done this, if we had been able to get to that area before it got dark. I mean, you're racing the light, you're racing the conditions. All those things can impact what you produce as a photographer. So yes, absolutely. I get into a funk, I feel like I'm not being particularly creative, or I'm not connecting with the work all that well. That does happen, and I have found that the only way I get myself out of that sounds almost stupidly simplistic, but I just keep working.
There's something to be said about tenacity and perseverance, and I think, again, that's been one of the hallmarks of your career, and just, you show your persistence in your workflow and the way things evolve from that. And I think it's really important for young people to see out there, especially those that, have the expectations that, it's just going to come. Sometimes it's just persistence, as what you said. So I'm glad we ended the segment on that particular question, and I'm glad we had you on this episode of Nikon TV. I think you legitimized Nikon TV now that we had Joe McNally on, so thank you, Joe.
Mark, if you're looking to me to legitimize yourself, I mean, that's that old expression, you're barking up the wrong tree, fella.
No, we did it, my friend, we did it. So thank you very much for having you coming to this set and giving your time to give your answers to Nikon TV audience. And thank you at home for those questions. We'll be back next time for our next episode. Join us on Facebook, subscribe, guys, and thanks for tuning in.